Have you ever tried to make a song or performance on the OPZ or another device and just ended up with one crappy loop that you play over and over and over again before giving up or starting a new project? Same. This is something I've honestly struggled a lot with, and although a lot of jams I see using the OPZ start out with an interesting loop, they don't really go anywhere. My first OPZ jam was exactly like this, but after maybe a dozen recorded performances, I've gotten to the point where I still have a lot to learn, but the feedback was really good and people had a lot of specific questions about the tracks, the settings, shortcuts, and everything regarding how to build and execute a full, long performance. So, to answer those questions, here are my OPZ performance tips and tricks. I'm not going to cover the absolute basics of building sounds and patterns for the synths and sample tracks, but if you want some deeper info with specific settings for different genres, I have more tutorials as well as performances using the Z on my channel and new videos coming every week. So consider subscribing if you want to learn more about synths, music, and the creative process. Full disclosure, there are going to be two parts to this video. The first part is going to be performance prep and involves a lot of housekeeping, shortcuts, and best practice tips. Although I would argue they're easily the most important part of this video, you can skip ahead if that would be boring and you just want to see more active playing, as I'm also going to cover effects, transitions, and tricks for performance in the second half of this video. You're about to hear the inconvenient truth about what's most important in songwriting, unfortunately: organization. First things first, back up your device. As in right now, pause this video and go back up your settings if you've done literally anything in terms of projects, patterns, sound design, idea sketching, experiments. Put the device into content mode, which just means holding the track button while you turn on your OPZ, and put it into your computer via the USB port. And then you want to copy all of your folders into an archive with the date or some kind of note so that the files are backed up. It doesn't really matter. They're not that big, so they can live on your desktop or in the cloud. Ideally both, if you want to be really safe. This is important because you're not going to worry about what has been in which project, and if you want to add new sounds halfway through, this is going to be really annoying because you're going to be worrying about what may have been used there. Which takes me to my next point. Import all of the sounds that you want to use in a song or performance from the start. You can use the archives from OP1 Fun. I've compiled some, and I've included some myself that I've made in my OPZ Techno tutorial. These were a few interesting packs that fit the concept I had in mind for my latest live performance, which was a mix of house and techno. The name gives it away, and I will link to that in the description. Next, it's important to boot your OPZ in manual save mode. So I'll put some instructions here on how to do that, but basically you can also just hold the P button while you turn on the dial. And you're going to be able to see, because of this little red track icon when you hold P, that it's in manual save mode. It's really fun to write and use this synth on the fly with the comfort of autosave, but if you switch to the manual save mode, or turn off autosave, it opens up a lot of freedom knowing that you can try new things, make mistakes, and they're not permanent. Just remember to save. I'll put the shortcut here. This will come in really handy when building patterns and progressions, and also when performing. Because when you've added anything important and you're sure you haven't accidentally written over some of your patterns or automation, you can save. Let's say you're stuck and you just have one basic pattern to start with. There are two main ways I would say that you can build this into a full song or performance template. Method number one is to repeatedly duplicate that pattern over and over, making small changes each time, and then by the time that it's somewhere over here, the sound has completely evolved. I would consider this the most common approach. If you're feeling bold or looking for inspiration, you can actually begin with two completely different patterns in the same project. So you could have one here and one here, and then actually try and blend them together. So using elements from both to a point where they meet in the middle and create the same effect of a progression, but in a completely different, maybe more difficult way. So let's listen to a huge jump between my first pattern and the last pattern that I've got. Now you can tell that they're two totally different patterns. It wasn't very fluid. It had the same tempo and was in time, but it completely jumped across and didn't feel natural. Let's look at a more subtle example where only a few elements are coming in across the first three patterns. See how much smoother that was? It was just a few things changing at a time. I hope those visual cues, whatever it is, however I'm going to do them, that they kind of explain that well, that you're just seeing a few things instead of the whole thing jumping across at the same time. So we've got a completely new project here, and let's just go to the hats and put in something basic. Okay, and let's add some kind of ARP. And then we just have those two pieces. We can duplicate that by going P, Shift, and then pressing the next pattern. So now we've got a duplicate there, and we can hold P, and what we want to do as well is make sure that we jump over there before we add changes. So maybe we want to add some extra elements to the hat. We want to have something on every beat. So now when we're transitioning between these things, it's much more natural because just one thing is being introduced. If we want to do a more extreme example, like we're talking about where we connect two patterns, we can just come here, go to a new fresh pattern, and let's introduce maybe some claps. Don't sound very good, but this is just for illustrating the example. I'm going to add a bass. And if we go to P, we kind of have this gap in between. So what we could do is we could take one bit from each of these and then bridge it kind of like a transition. So now we're currently in this pattern. We're in the bass track. Maybe we want to actually take these claps. So we go P, Shift 3 times, and then we're sending it to the pattern in between. And then we want to do the same. Let's go to the second pattern, and maybe we want to take the ARP that we have going there, and then we go P, Shift 3 times, and then we'll send it here. So really terrible sounding song, but if you compare that to transitioning between it sounds like it's all part of the same pattern as opposed to jumping across to a totally different thing. There's another trick, the best way I would say working really fast with this kind of technique. So you're not constantly checking the manual, looking up YouTube vids, trying to show the shortcuts and duplicate tracks, patterns and other things. And it's just Post-it notes. It's seriously the best thing ever. Maybe a bit of sticky tape to help you as well. My number one tip is to write 1 or 2 of the most common shortcuts that you want to use but don't already know intuitively by heart. Having it handy is going to make it easier to check and remember, so you don't force yourself to use less efficient ways of working and then become stuck in bad habits. I also use this same shortcut for video editing programs at work. I use it for vocabulary, learning different languages, and it has been a really good help. Once you've mastered that shortcut, just swap it out, put another thing that you might want to memorize next, and just always have something so you're constantly learning. So these tips should hopefully get your projects to the point that you understand how to have enough patterns and chain them together in a full performative jam. And with updates, you can actually extend them over multiple projects in sync if you wanted to play even a full hour set. The most important stage for me before I record one of these videos is doing a quick smoke test. That means just sequencing them up in order of the pattern. So look, press P and play, and then I'm just going to listen to all of them in order and then hit play. And I think that that's going to give me an idea. It doesn't have to sound perfect, but I have the freedom that if I screw up, I know that roughly these things work in order and I can afford to make mistakes and it's not going to be a total nightmare. Right, part 2, performance techniques. In the case that you decided to skip the first part, I'm going to use this spot as a friendly reminder that manual save is the way to go. That way you can make changes while performing and come back to your original save state, and you don't have to reset all the parameters that you mucked up while jamming. I have stupidly done this while making some of my videos, so please learn from my mistakes. It's a huge waste of time and really annoying. So I'm going to give you a small menu of simple ways to improvise live, and I suggest starting with just a few, selecting the ones that you find most fun. It sounds very cheesy, but ask yourself, like, is this actually fun, or how do I best utilize this synth? And your performances will improve immediately because it's not supposed to feel like work. We're just making music. If you're having fun, there's going to be more energy and inspiration, and you're actually going to execute better because it's way easier to remember all of these things that you've chosen yourself. So one of the simplest ways is just bringing something in yourself through a volume or a filter fade. So let's bring in this chord with the volume manually. So that's a really easy way to bring something in or out and do it yourself and just kind of like get the feeling based on the rest of the music and have something natural happening. So let's turn that back up already. But what we're going to do is we're going to play with the filter. I know it's very common, like maybe overused, but I think this is one of the best ways to just bring things in and out. It's really dynamic. It has a cool effect, almost like a phaser. One of the other ones is effects fading and automation. So if we go over here, then we can see where our delay and reverb are at, or you could use whichever effect you want to set on the sends. And if you want, you can either use the record play or just hold record while you're putting it in. And it's going to remember those settings. The other big one is mute groups. So it seems pretty obvious, but this is actually a big component of a lot of my live sets because I'm just getting a feel for what should be coming in and out. So just such a small thing that gives you a huge change while you're still just in the same pattern so that you don't have to create like individual mute groups across here. The other thing is that if you go into this mixer setting, then actually what you're doing is you're just changing the mixer settings for part 1. So what you could do is start off in mixer group 1 with like all the drums on, come across to number 2 where it's also got them on, take them out, and instead of having to press both, you just change the group. You can do this across multiple things, but I like doing it in one group, but this gives you more options if you want to be a bit more experimental. It's also great to have some one-shots, whether they're vocals or drones or interesting sound effects. And then you can just play them in different ways, like can be any kind of build up or just expression, and you can actually combine that with the filter in. It wasn't a perfect performance, but because I used it live, I'll just show here an example of how I used both the filter and spamming one shots just to get an interesting house effect. The mix is pretty bad. This pitch bend that you've probably seen, that can be really useful because unfortunately they have not updated as of 2020 the recording in of pitch bend information, but what you can do is play it in live. So that's really useful in different genres. I covered that in my lo-fi hip-hop tutorial. I'll show a quick example from that where you get this kind of warp effect if you use it on different instruments. Live playing the keys is obviously one of the best ways. You can combine a preset sequence and then turn off the mixer, and then if you're in a track, sorry, too many words. If you're in the track and then you play the keys, although it's set off on the mixer, you can still play it live. So you can have a sequence going, turn it off, and then jump in. I'll show you another example where I use that and also the pitch bend together. If you're not so keen on playing keys in like a full-on way, especially because these are pretty tiny, what you can use, the ARP, it's really, really good because it's kind of got obviously that time quantized setting from the speed for the revolutions, and you can play chords and it's going to cycle through those. But what I find really cool about this is if we go to a different pattern that has maybe a bit more. Playing over the top is actually going to add into the existing ARP. So you can play them together and it's going to sound really cool basically no matter what. There is also the tape track. While it has its uses, I find it quite glitchy, which is cool if you want to go for something like Aphex Twin or True Cuckoo, really experimental and playful. But you can also sequence in something on the tape track. And if it's sounding like too much, you can actually use Shift and send it to one particular instrument. So that gives you a little bit more to play with if you just use Shift while in the performance track, and you can be a bit more selective so that it's not warping the whole thing and being what I find usually a bit too much. Obviously, speaking of tracks, if we go across to The performance track, this is the holy grail of performing, as the name suggests, but it's almost a little bit too good. Don't try to be like a little kid playing Street Fighter and just mash all of the buttons. You want to have a bit of approach where you don't just hope it works out for the best. Try to tailor it and learn what the different settings are so that it's going to sound all right beforehand and you have an idea of what is going to happen. That way it's way more powerful when you actually use it in practice. By the way, you have the drum or sample channels with effects on the left-hand side, and it's segmented with the synths on the second half of the keys. By the way, in case you didn't know that, it's very important. So I'm just going to go over a couple of them very quickly. You've got the filter sweeps. The only extra thing I'd mention about those, they're quite explanatory, they're quite self-explanatory, is that sometimes it takes a second to come back to center when it's rotating through that filter wave. So if you're gonna let go right before a drop, just be careful, because I had noticed that in one of my performances that like the kick didn't quite come in because I was filtering the drums. There's the random effect, which is really cool. Let's mute that tape effect we put on. This is really cool when you have a lot of notes on the lead, or like here the up track, and you want to play them in an unexpected way, but I'd say you want to hit this away from the main chord or bass notes, because otherwise your progression is going to be really set off and you're going to lose that like spine of your melody. You want to check first that this sounds okay before you do it live, because it's basically set on the master track, or this logic that it's using, and if you have complex harmonies and things are going a bit crazy, it can get a bit confused. I will talk about this in a later video, but it really deserves a whole conversation of its own. There's the short and long and pitch buttons, which I think can actually be really cool in combination if you want to do a bit of a breakdown. But again, you want to see what works, because sometimes it can sound a bit crap, but sometimes it makes for like a really good drop or B section. Like I said, with all of these, it's best to note what effects, or whether that's, you know, filtering or playing something live, or just using a lot of breakdown with filter or something like that. Use a pen and paper if you can. I would write that for this song. I know it off by heart now, but I had some notes saying that I would put in the vocal chop and the filter sweep here. I would use some randomization effects, and then you know, a few different bits and pieces here. So then you get to a certain point that you don't need that anymore, but same as the shortcuts on the back, it's really useful to have. Don't make life harder for yourself. So what do you do now that you have this full song rather than a loop? Go out and record it. I think that that's the best way. It's kind of the final test to play through in one go, see how it all fits together, even if it's only for yourself. You don't have to upload it, but that's the reason that I originally started this channel, to make some performances, challenge myself, to explore a bit more musically, try to have it at the point that it was a kind of final product, share what I'm learning along the way with people who are also on the same path with the OPZ or in music in general. So just make sure you do what's fun and inspiring, and if you do record something, feel free to share it with me. Drop any questions you have in the comments, and yeah, please like or subscribe if you did like it or you want more videos like this. I'm also on Instagram if you want to be in touch. I post a lot of music, photos and art that I do over there as well if you want to connect. But yeah, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.